In the mid-20th century, a political movement swept across the Soviet Union that would change the course of history. This movement was known as De-Stalinization, and it aimed to remove the legacy of Joseph Stalin from the country he had ruled for decades. De-Stalinization was more than just a political movement. It was a cultural and social revolution that brought about significant changes in the Soviet Union and beyond. Today, we will explore the impact of de-Stalinization on the world and reflect on its lasting legacy. De-Stalinization refers to the process of removing the influence and legacy of Joseph Stalin from Soviet society. It was a period of political and cultural reform that took place in the Soviet Union after Stalin's death in 1953. The goal of de-Stalinization was to dismantle the cult of personality that had been built around Stalin and to undo some of the policies and practices that had been put in place during his rule. Historically, de-Stalinization was a response to the atrocities committed by Stalin's regime, including the purges, show trials, and forced labor camps. It was also an attempt to distance the Soviet Union from Stalin's aggressive foreign policy and to improve relations with other countries. The process of de-Stalinization was initiated by Nikita Khrushchev, who became the leader of the Soviet Union after Stalin's death. Stalin's rise to power was marked by a combination of cunning, ambition, and brutality. He rose through the ranks of the Communist Party, becoming its leader after Lenin's death in 1924. Stalin's impact on the Soviet Union was profound, as he transformed it into an industrial powerhouse and a military superpower. However, his policies also led to widespread suffering and repression. Stalin's leadership style was characterized by a cult of personality, in which he was portrayed as a godlike figure. He also implemented policies of forced collectivization and industrialization, which resulted in famine, death, and the destruction of traditional ways of life. Despite these atrocities, Stalin remained popular among many people, who saw him as a strong leader who could protect the Soviet Union from its enemies. Stalin's policies and ideology had a profound and lasting impact on the Soviet Union and the world at large. His emphasis on heavy industry and collectivization led to rapid industrialization, but also caused great suffering for millions of people. The purges and show trials of the Great Terror left a legacy of fear and suspicion that persisted long after Stalin's death. Stalin's cult of personality also had far-reaching consequences. It created an atmosphere of obedience and conformity that stifled creativity and dissent. Many talented artists, writers, and intellectuals were silenced or exiled because they did not conform to Stalin's vision of socialist realism. Khrushchev's famous speech denouncing Stalin was a turning point in Soviet history. In his speech, Khrushchev condemned Stalin's policies and personality cult, revealing the atrocities committed under his rule. The speech was met with shock and disbelief by many in the Soviet Union and around the world. One of the most memorable quotes from Khrushchev's speech was when he said, "Stalin acted not through persuasion, explanation, and patient cooperation with people, but by imposing his concepts and demanding absolute submission to his opinion." Whoever opposed this concept or tried to prove his viewpoint and the correctness of his position was doomed to removal from the leadership collective and to subsequent moral and physical annihilation. This quote perfectly encapsulates the impact of Stalin's rule and the importance of de-Stalinization. During the de-Stalinization period, significant policies and reforms were implemented to reverse the damage caused by Stalin's regime. One of the most notable policies was the release of political prisoners who had been unjustly imprisoned under Stalin's rule. This included many intellectuals, writers, and artists who had been silenced or persecuted for their beliefs. Another important reform was the decentralization of power from Moscow to the republics, which allowed for greater autonomy and representation for minority groups within the Soviet Union. Additionally, the government began to address the issue of censorship and propaganda, allowing for a greater diversity of opinion and artistic expression. This led to a flourishing of literature, art, and film that had previously been suppressed under Stalin's strict guidelines. Overall, the de-Stalinization policies aimed to create a more open, democratic society that valued individual rights and freedoms over the cult of personality that had dominated under Stalin. Despite the efforts of Khrushchev and his allies, opposition to de-Stalinization was widespread. Many in the Soviet Union saw Stalin as a hero who had saved the country from Nazi invasion and transformed it into a superpower. They were skeptical of the reforms being implemented and feared that they would weaken the country's strength and stability. Those implementing the reforms faced significant challenges, including resistance from party officials and bureaucrats who were loyal to Stalin's legacy. Some even saw the reforms as a threat to their own power and privilege, and actively worked to undermine them. Despite these obstacles, Khrushchev and his allies persisted in their efforts to bring about change, ultimately laying the groundwork for a more open and democratic Soviet Union. De-Stalinization had a profound impact on Soviet culture, particularly in literature, art, and film. Many artists who had been suppressed under Stalin's regime were able to express themselves more freely during this period of liberalization. Writers such as Alexander Solzhenitsyn and Boris Pasternak were able to publish works that had previously been banned, while filmmakers such as Andrei Tarkovsky were able to explore new themes and styles. One of the most notable changes in Soviet art during de-Stalinization was the rise of Neo-Impressionism. This style, characterized by its use of pointillism and bright colors, was seen as a departure from the drab realism that had dominated Soviet art under Stalin. Artists such as Pavel Kuznetsov and Yuri Pimenov embraced this new style, creating vibrant and energetic paintings that captured the optimism of the period. De-Stalinization had a significant economic impact on the Soviet Union, particularly in industry and agriculture. The policies implemented during this period aimed to decentralize the economy and reduce the power of state planners, allowing for more market-based decision-making. This led to an increase in productivity and efficiency, as well as greater innovation and technological advancements. In agriculture, de-Stalinization brought about a shift away from large collective farms towards smaller family-owned plots. This allowed farmers more autonomy in decision-making and incentivized increased production through profit sharing. As a result, agricultural output increased significantly during this period. De-Stalinization had a significant impact on the international community, particularly in terms of Soviet relations with other countries. The policies implemented during this period led to a thawing of tensions between the Soviet Union and the West, as well as a shift towards more peaceful coexistence. One example of this was the 1955 Geneva Summit, where Khrushchev met with leaders from the United States, France, and Great Britain to discuss issues such as disarmament and the reunification of Germany. While no major agreements were reached, the fact that the summit took place at all was seen as a positive step towards improved relations. De-Stalinization had a profound impact on the Soviet Union and the world at large. It marked a turning point in Soviet history, as the country began to move away from the oppressive policies of Stalin's regime. The reforms implemented during this period allowed for greater political freedom, economic growth, and cultural expression. However, de-Stalinization was not without its challenges. The opposition to the reforms was fierce, and many feared that the changes would lead to chaos and instability. Despite these challenges, the legacy of de-Stalinization endures to this day, serving as a reminder of the power of reform and the importance of standing up for what is right. In conclusion, de-Stalinization was a pivotal moment in Soviet history that had far-reaching consequences for the country and the world. It represented a break from the oppressive policies of the Stalin era and ushered in a period of reform and change. While de-Stalinization faced opposition and challenges, it ultimately led to significant cultural, economic, and international changes that shaped the course of Soviet history. It is important to remember this period and its legacy as we continue to navigate the complexities of our own time.